final hour of today's edition of the Chad Hasty Show. My next guest, always a pleasure to visit with Congressman Jodey Arrington. Congressman, good afternoon. How are you this evening?
Hey, Chad, great to be with you. Congrats on your new show, and God bless West Texas.
Thank you. Appreciate you visiting with us today. It's the last 24 hours sure have been interesting. America sure has changed in the last 24 hours, Congressman. You look at the executive orders that have been signed by President Joe Biden. I thought that we were going for unity in the United States. It doesn't really seem like it with the actions taken so far.
Yeah, well, you know, the Democrats have been calling for unity now that they have a Democrat president, and they feel like they've gotten rid of Trump. But just remember, when President Trump was inaugurated, you had a lot of Democrats boycott his inauguration. I don't think one Republican did. In fact, most put a statement out like I did to congratulate President Biden and to sort of celebrate our country and the peaceful transition of power, not Democrats. And they not only did they boycott, they began impeachment. That was the headline in the Washington Post. Let the impeachment begin. And boy, did it ever. And for 4 years. And what a sad state of affairs. But yeah, just like Obama, Biden has taken the I have a cell phone in 10 approach to legislative activism from the Oval Office. And I hope most of this onslaught of executive activism is stopped by the courts, but it is very disconcerting.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go back to Election Day and just the fortification of Washington, D.C. What was that like? I mean, you were in D.C. back on 9/11, working in the White House at that time. Obviously, you were in D.C. when the Capitol building was breached, and then you have a green zone set up around the U.S. Capitol. What has just been your overall feeling about the what it's been like in D.C. The last 48 hours or so?
Well, it's changed like the 9/11, sort of post 9/11, where you see a lot more military personnel, heightened security everywhere. I think that they were planning for a lot of rioting if President Trump won because of the months of riots that were happening across the country by Antifa and leftist groups. I think we should have been much better prepared on January 6th. When we had the electoral count proceedings, at which time I objected, as did others, on the grounds of constitutionality from some states who operated outside the legislature. But nobody, we should have been better prepared. Obviously, the Capitol Police did a good job that were there, and they risked their lives. They were brave, and I commend them for it. But horrible preparedness, I would say, was my big takeaway.
Yeah. And of course, you mentioned that they were prepared for violence. We've seen violence in the United States for a while now with the protest on the left, with whether it's Black Lives Matter or Antifa. And, these protests, they sort of get swept under the rug. You have an event on January 6th that you had people who did rush into the Capitol building, but Congressman, going off of the line from the Democrats, it was a mostly peaceful protest. Most of the people who were there were just fine. What about this hypocrisy that we see in the media and among the left when you look at these groups that are still, even as of last night, attacking an ICE building, an ICE facility in Portland, and there's hardly any media coverage about it?
Well, it is a glaring double standard. It makes you sick. Once again, Republicans immediately condemned the violence at the Capitol. I certainly did when we were holed up and sheltering in place. There's no place for that in our great civil society, and certainly as a guy that introduced legislation to increase the penalty on assaulting law enforcement officers and for federal rioting statutes. This is something we've been talking about for months, but we haven't heard nigh a word from Democrats condemning what's happened in Seattle, Portland, and other cities across the country. By the way, on Inauguration Day, while they were preparing for maybe another sort of experience like went down at the Capitol from sort of far-right groups, we had Antifa, once again, burning federal buildings, wreaking havoc, terrorizing, and committing all sorts of crimes in Denver and other places. And Black Lives Matter, also 20-plus members of that organization on Martin Luther King Day, of all days. I mean, the man who preached nonviolence, a great American who wanted to make changes through, peaceful means. And but you won't hear any of that. You won't read it in the papers, even in our local paper. You won't see it on the mainstream media, cable news, because they don't want that narrative. They want you to think that Trump was the one that fomented all of this insurrectionist and seditious behavior. Well, we know that's true. We know that was fake news, and unfortunately, there's just going to be a lot of this double standard from this point forward. My job is to call them out, expose them, and hold people to account.
Yeah, absolutely. Visiting with Congressman Jodey Arrington here on the Chad Hasty Show. Let's talk about impeachment. Nancy Pelosi, I believe it was earlier today, she was asked a question about whether this impeachment trial would really unify America. If Democrats are serious about unifying America, doesn't this undermine this impeachment trial? Wouldn't this undermine unification? And she said no. She said no, quote, "No, I don't think it's very unifying to say, let's just forget about it and move on. That's not how you unify." Congressman, is there any way America can unify if we are trying to convict a former president?
Absolutely not. It's consistent. It's double speak, and it's going to be an overreach that Democrats will pay for down the road because the American people aren't buying it. There are certainly a number of people critical of this president, critical of his response surrounding January 6th. I put my criticisms out there, and I try to call things as I see them. He could have done better. He could have had a stronger response. But there is nothing that comes close to convicting this president of treason or high crimes, all the requisite all the requirements of impeachment or inciting a riot. We all have a responsibility as political leaders, no doubt, to ratchet down the caustic environment and the charged climate. But the Democrats are going to distract from Joe Biden's efforts to put his team in place, and they're going to further divide and further inflame dissensions in this country. It's just not leadership. It's just not leadership by any measure, not to mention it's just more of the same weaponization that we've seen from Pelosi for the last 4 years, and they cannot stop their obsession with President Trump. It will hurt them in the long run.
What are you hearing as far as a timeline and how many Republicans in the Senate that may support impeaching and convicting the president?
Well, I don't think it's actually going to happen because of the things that I said. They'll poll because that's how they lead most politicians. Forget just out of conviction doing what's right. So I don't think it happens. This president, and it's no small feat because I used to work in presidential personnel for Bush 43, has got to put his team in place, and you can't do both. People say you can, but you can't. There's still a debate whether you can impeach a president once he's gone. I think this is this is political. I mean, no surprise. I think it's a politically motivated and manufactured effort to try to get rid of and disgrace President Trump once and for all. But I think they're going to have the opposite effect with Trump supporters. And the other part of it is, Chad, I don't know that they know what to do without President Trump. They don't. I mean, they need something to unite them, and because they're going to fall apart, they're going to implode because they are so not on the same page, and we're going to see that, I think, in the weeks to come. So this is just also holding on the last hopes of a unified Democrat Party. You will see them implode. You mark my words, within weeks and months, because the left is dragging them to a point of no return. So they don't need any help from me or President Trump. The left will take them down a very, very bad road politically, and I think they're in worse shape than the Republicans, and the Republicans have some issues to deal with.
Yeah, there is a split within the Republican Party, and there's a split within the Democrat Party. Like you said, I mean, you're going to have the far left really try to push Joe Biden on many issues like the Green New Deal that he may or may not be willing to move that far right now.
Yeah, well, he's certainly trying his best with his cell phone and pen, as Obama said, with canceling the Keystone Pipeline and moratorium on drilling on public lands. Obviously, the Paris Climate Accord is a disaster for West Texas, a disaster for the prospect of recovering from the pandemic and government shutdowns, from the mandates, et cetera. So he's going to do his best. Some of it is symbolic and posturing. I think the courts put a stay when Obama said no drilling on public lands. But again, go back to the left, and are you going to satisfy the insatiable desire for radical policies from the left? Joe Biden will not be able to do it. Even with the most radical leftist, liberal former U.S. Senator Kamala Harris as his vice president, who, by the way, right before the election was raising money to bail criminals out who were rioting in the streets of Portland and other places, only sending them out with zero accountability to do more of the same, commit more crimes and lawlessness. But again, ironically, the left is the group that was rioting during inauguration because they don't believe Biden has gone far enough. And it's day one. They want to abolish the ICE and defund the police and open the borders. It will never be enough. I'm telling you that this party is going to have real problems trying to govern, let alone stay politically relevant for the future elections.
We're going to have one more segment with Congressman Jodey Arrington. When we come back, Congressman, thank you for joining us. We'll be right back with you, and we'll get into some of the actions that the president has taken already and what it means for West Texas. We'll be right back on the Chad Hasty Show. Visiting with Congressman Jodey Arrington. Congressman, again, thank you very much for joining us today. You brought up the Paris Climate Accords, and the president, with a swipe of the pen, was able to put the U.S. back into the Paris Climate Accords. For those who may not know, what impact will this have on the United States, and in particular West Texas?
It will be devastating. President Obama, I believe, usurped the will of the people by agreeing and binding the United States. I think it undermines our sovereignty, and it needed to be ratified like any other treaty. He didn't call it a treaty, so he worked his political magic. And of course, nobody in the media was going to hold them account for it. But it's going to cost millions of jobs across the country, $250 billion to the economy in just the next several years. We give China and Russia, two of our major adversaries, a pass where they don't do anything to reduce their greenhouse gas or carbon emissions for 10 years. And then we subsidize India. It is horrible on so many levels, and it really doesn't do much substantively, even if we were able to enforce it. The other problem is there's no way to enforce it. America, Chad, is leading in reducing greenhouse gases and, even over the last 4 years, substantially reducing our carbon footprint. And the 6 key pollutants in the Clean Air Act, they've dropped 70% since the 1970s when we passed it, while we grew the economy over 250%. This is the American way, not mandates and regulation, but innovation, carbon sequestration, natural gas, and our ability to export LNG around the world, lowering these gases and giving us a cleaner environment while we grow. I mean, so West Texas is ground zero for oil and gas. So it would just absolutely decimate rural economies like ours and others in Oklahoma, in North Dakota, and Pennsylvania. It's horrible. But remember, when somebody tells you who they are, believe them. Biden was coming for oil and gas. President Trump called him out in that second debate. That's why we won Eastern New Mexico seats for Congress. We won Southwestern Oklahoma seats in Congress. We weren't able to get the presidency. That's a whole nother conversation. But, yeah, bad, very bad stuff, most of which I think will be stopped by the courts. But it's still going to be really bad for producers in West Texas.
You know, obviously we've got the Keystone XL pipeline. The one of the immediate effects from President Biden's executive orders that's going, 11,000 jobs are gone. I mean, when you start your presidency off killing off 11,000 jobs, I don't know how you get a round of applause for that. But what are some of the other ramifications of that?
Well, that's a partnership with Canada, and between Canada and Mexico, we are not just coming upon energy dominance in America because of our abundant supply of fossil energy, but we are also getting closer and closer to energy independence for North America. That's key in the geopolitical landscape, especially as it relates to China and Russia. And so, they built 100 miles. That's a sunk cost. That's billions and billions of private investment. It was interesting, Chad. The progressive Justin Trudeau even condemned this administration for such a knee-jerk reaction to trying to appease the climate alarmists who think the end of the world is coming in 10 years. So bad, again, really bad. And as you said, the president will have to be accountable for the economy. He can't blame COVID forever. This is going to be a big blow to our recovery and a big blow to the jobs.
Congressman, appreciate your time today. We're going to visit often here on the Chad Hasty Show, and we appreciate your time.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Chad, and congrats again. God bless.
Thank you. That's Congressman Jodey Arrington.